This is Algebra 1, Lesson 10-4, Graphing Quadratics in Factored Form. Today's date is Thursday, April 2nd, 2020. And that messed up a little bit. Why is that writing right there? Interesting. Whatever. I'll just say it like that. Our objective today is, when given a quadratic in factored form, to graph the vertex and one of the x-intercepts. Technically both of the x-intercepts, but you only have to do one for Khan Academy. So let's start off with the vocab that we talked about in the last lesson in 10-3, the difference between functions, graphs, equations, and expressions. So hopefully you have these memorized and you can fill them in, maybe pause the video to practice, right? Or maybe just look back at your notes. Functions have zeros. Graphs have x-intercepts. And equations have solutions. And expressions have roots. All of these are synonymous, but in different contexts. Today we're dealing with functions and graphs, not necessarily equations. I guess supposedly we're turning a function into an equation, so we're not dealing with expressions, but you will eventually use properties of expressions in later lessons. The big thing to notice that I haven't pointed out in the last lesson is all of these look the same in terms of -3, -5, -3, -5, -3, -5, and then all of a sudden a +3 and a +5. So this is the thing that we need to be careful of. When eventually we find the solutions, we use the zero product property to set this equal to 0, and then we add 3 to both sides. That's why we have a +3 here. So if you want to think of it, oh, you always take the opposite to get over here, you're close. Just remember, if you have a 2x, you have to do a little bit more math there. So make sure that we're always looking at the x-intercepts and using all the information that we have to get there. All right, so here's our generalized procedure. First, you're going to find both of your x-intercepts. My hint for you is set equation to 0. Or I guess set your function to 0. Set f of x equal to 0. Then you're going to find the x-coordinate of the vertex. And again, if you forgot what vertex means, on a parabola, the vertex is that bottom point down here. This is the vertex. And we're only finding the x-coordinate. We don't know how far up and down. It might be right here. It might be right there. We don't know how far up and down that vertex is yet. We just know how far left and right it is, what the x-coordinate of that vertex is. And my hint for you, I have 2 different hints that you can use. You can either think of the average of the x-coordinates, or you can actually do the equation. Maybe I'll just write the equation, which is x1 plus x2. Add them together and then divide by 2. That will give you the x-coordinate of the vertex. And lastly, you're going to find the actual height of that vertex. What is the y-coordinate of the vertex? And we haven't done that, so that's going to be the new little bit of math that we're using. Once you find the height, then you are basically done. How do you find that height, though? And then my hint for you, I guess I can put that in parentheses for the hint. My hint for you is to plug in this number, whatever you found in step 2, into your equation. So we have a function right here. Once I find, oh, x is equal to, I don't know, 5, then, oh, that might have been correct. No, it's not. Okay. You plug in 5 into both these x, and then you multiply everything together and figure out what the height is. All right, so we have 2 examples. Let's go through these. Okay, here's our function. I need to graph it. So step number 1, find the x-intercepts. I do that by setting this f of x equal to 0. So I now have 0 is equal to 1/3 times the quantity of x plus 1 times the quantity of x plus 7. And you can use the zero product right away, but remember that I can't set all 3 of these equal to 0. I could if this was a variable, but it doesn't make sense for me to say, okay, set this equal to 0, 1/3 equals 0, and then set this equal to 0. Wait, 1/3 equals 0. You can't do that. Like 1/3 is never 0, so you don't have to worry about it. It's equivalent of saying multiply both sides by 3 and 3, and it gets rid of this 1/3. 3 times 0 is 0, which means ignore the 1/3. So zero product property states that I'm going to have x plus 1 times, or I'll just go ahead and skip a step. That's equal to 0, and this x plus 7 is also equal to 0. I guess I didn't need the parentheses here. Let's go ahead and get rid of those, and then solve, right? So add 1 or subtract 1 from both sides, and x is equal to -1. I know I'm skipping steps, but I think you guys can catch up. I'm subtracting 1 from both sides. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. X is equal to -7. So I've found both of the x-intercepts. This is the x-axis. The x-intercepts are on that axis at the coordinates -1, 0. So -1, 0, and -7, 0, -7, 0. And I'm hoping you can kind of take a shortcut in example number 2 and saying, oh, well, that's a +1, then I should have a coordinate at -1. If this is +7, oh, I should have a coordinate here at -7, 0. So that's step number 1. I'm on step number 2 now, which is to find the x-coordinate of the vertex. I'm going to add these two values together and then divide them by 2. I'm taking the average. So this was step number 1. Step number 1. Come on now. Step number 1. Now I'm on step number 2. And my tablet doesn't want to respond. Step number 2 is to say -1 plus -7 divided by 2. That's going to be -8 divided by 2, which is -4. So we know if I were to make a line to demonstrate this point at -4 right here, I'm going to have a line that goes right there. So I know somewhere on that line, that's where our vertex is. In fact, this line that I'm drawing is the axis of symmetry. So the point might be there, it might be there, it might be there. We don't know where the vertex is. We don't know the height. So that's step 3. What is the height? Step number 3. Plug in this -4 into these x's up here. So my new equation says f of x is equal to, I still have that 1/3 now. It's going to be -4 plus 1 times the quantity of -4 plus 7. And if I did my math right, these two numbers should be the same number but opposites of each other. You'll see what I mean in a second. So this is now, I'm only going to do the right hand side. -4 plus 1 is -3. So I have 1/3 times -3 times -4 plus 7 is +3. These numbers should be the same. One should be positive, one should be negative. That's what it means to be opposites. Okay, let's multiply everything together. I'm going to do this right hand side first. -3 times 3 is -9. So this is saying what is 1/3 of -9. And 1/3 of 9 is the same thing as saying what is -9 divided by 3, and that's equal to -3. And that's the height. The y value, this f of x, I can really think of this as the y, right? So the y value here is -3. So I come down here to the height of -3 on this line on this axis of symmetry, and I haven't graphed it yet, but these are the main points that you need. So on Khan Academy, you have to graph the vertex. That's the most important point when it comes to parabolas, and one of these x-intercepts, sorry. It doesn't matter which one. And you'll check that when you graph those two, the other x-intercept should be correct. So all we can do for our notes is kind of sketch that, yeah, it's going to be, oh, that's a bad sketch. Yeah, it's going to be some sort of parabola that goes up that direction. I don't know where it goes from there, but it roughly looks like that. All right, and on to example number 2. All right, so again, step 1 is going to be finding the x-intercepts, but we can do that. Our shortcut for step 1 is looking at the opposite of -1, that's +1. Our x-intercept therefore is 1, 0. Opposite of +3 is -3, so we have an x-intercept at -3, 0. Done. Step number 2, find the average between the average of 1 and -3. So I say 1 plus -3, divide that by 2. That's equal to -2 divided by 2, which is equal to -1. So that means at this coordinate -1, I can draw a line. That'll be our axis of symmetry for our parabola. And we know that somewhere on that line, we're going to have our vertex. So step number 3 is actually finding the height of that vertex, and then we're done with the problem. So the thing I'm going to do, I'm going to plug in this -1 into our function up here. I'm going to change this to y equals to make it a little bit more easy to understand. So y equals -1/2. This is going to be -1 minus 1. And then this quantity is going to be -1 plus 3. Let's go ahead and simplify a little bit. So this is now going to be y is equal to, what's that equal to? Y is equal to -1/2. This is going to be a -1 plus a -1. Keep change. So it's going to be -2 here. And -1 plus 3 is +2. We know that we did the right work because these are opposites of one another. I'm going to cross cancel this 2 with this 2. Slightly different method than last time. And a negative times a negative is a positive, so those cancel in air quotes as well. And I'm left with just 2. So y is equal to 2. I come up to a height of 2, and there's our vertex. Let's go ahead and sketch what this looks like just for our notes. So I have a parabola coming down like that, and a parabola coming down like that. And of course with Khan Academy, it's just dragging around the vertex and one of these x-intercepts. That's all there is to it. That concludes Algebra 1 Notes 10-4. I'll see you guys tomorrow.